Hello, children. It's lovely to be with you again. Here is our cross in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. And here is our lighted candle. And we remember that you are there where you are, and I am here in Temple House. But for this time, we're together. And we remember that Jesus said that when or three are gathered together, there he is, right in the middle of us. And this candle is a symbol of the light of Christ, the light of Jesus. Now today I'm going to ask you to have a think. I do so wish that we were in church so that you could answer my questions, but I'm just going to have to imagine what your answers might be. This is the question. When I say these two words, king or queen, what do those words make you think of? Now I'm going to be quiet just for a moment because I want you to think king or queen. Well, I think you might think of a crown because kings and queens often have a crown, don't they? Don't wear it all the time, but they have a number of crowns. But I'm thinking of a big crown with fur, ermine all around it, and velvet and jewels, and quite a big tall crown. I know that when our queen was made queen, she said that the crown was very heavy and she had to practice wearing it. It was so heavy. So you might think of a crown. You might think of long, rich, velvet, fur-lined, fur-trimmed robes, the sort that our queen wears on state occasions sometimes. You might think of a palace, kings and queens living in a very big palace, or perhaps several palaces. You might think of a king or queen having lots of servants and having everything done for them. They don't have to really do anything for themselves. You might think of them mixing with very rich, wealthy people and eating very posh food. You might think of kings and queens being very powerful. And certainly in some countries they are very powerful because they don't have the same parliament and government as we have, prime ministers. They can be very, very powerful. Well, I wonder, and perhaps you can talk about it with your teachers afterwards, what else you thought about. Well, let me tell you that on Sunday in church, now we can't be in church, I have to do the service on YouTube, just like I'm doing your service, because at the moment we're in that lockdown, aren't we? And we can't go to church. But we're celebrating a special feast called Christ the King. And we wear the red robes. So we'll wear red for Christ the King. Now, when we think of Jesus, Christ the King, well, I think he was a different kind of king, because let's go back to those questions and the answers I gave you. Did Jesus have a crown? No, he didn't, did he? And did he have very rich robes? No, he didn't. He wore ordinary clothes, just like other ordinary people would have worn at that time. Different to our clothes because it was a different time and a different country. And what about where did he live? Well, he didn't live in a palace like we think kings and queens do. He didn't even live in a big house. And where did he live? Well, he lived for most of his life in Galilee, in Nazareth. But he did spend some time in Egypt because you remember his parents had to run away from a wicked king who was trying to kill all the little boys because he had heard from the kings who came to visit Jesus that a new king had been born and he didn't want anybody taking his kingship off him. And remember, he did that dreadful thing of killing the little boys. So they had to run away to Egypt. But apart from that, he lived in Galilee, Nazareth. And he would probably have lived, it wasn't a royal family that Jesus was born into, like many kings. It was just an ordinary family and not a very wealthy family. Joseph, we know, was a carpenter and made his money by making things with wood and perhaps repairing things, making things and repairing things. So they wouldn't have been, there's lots of hints in the Bible that they weren't very rich. So that's not like the king we described in the beginning, is it? And we don't really know the house, although in 2006 some archaeologists found a 1st century house in the place where Jesus lived and said they believed it was the place where Jesus grew up as a little boy. Well, we don't know that, but what we do know is that that would have been the kind of house that Jesus lived in, and it was made of stone and it was cut into the rock. So part of it would have been like a hollow in a rock. So we know the kind of house, and it certainly was nothing like a palace. We do know that kings in those days did have beautiful palaces, like King Solomon. He had a wonderful palace. So Jesus isn't sounding like the king that we started off thinking about in the beginning. Now, powerful friends. No, Jesus fell out with the powerful people. Now, I wonder why that was. Well, you see, the powerful rulers at that time, the religious leaders and the rulers, you'll remember that they were not doing the right thing. They were oppressing the people that they were supposed to be looking after. They were taking more money from them than they needed to take. And they weren't being good to their people. And Jesus told them about this. And you remember, I love that story actually, where he was so cross that he went and turned over all the tables in the temple and said, "You are making my father's house a den of thieves with your cheating behaviour." So no, I'm afraid he didn't have powerful friends. Well, why was all of that? Because Jesus was a different kind of king. He was a king of all the earth and heaven. He was the Son of God who created and made all things. And lots of people didn't really understand that. And when Jesus performed his miracles of healing and other miracles like feeding the 5,000. Now, when he fed the 5,000, you'll remember that story, when they had gone to listen to Jesus and it was getting late and they were hungry and they had no food. And there was just a little boy who said, I've got 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And Jesus said to the disciples, well, we'll share this out. Well, the disciples thought Jesus was quite ridiculous. But somehow a miracle happened and all those people were fed. Now, when the people saw that, they wanted to make Jesus king. But Jesus went away. He went away up onto the hillside, and his disciples went out onto the lake. And later on, Jesus joined them. It was the story where he was walking on the water. But he went away because he didn't want to be made an earthly king. He wasn't that kind of king. He was king forever. He was king then and he's still king now. And he was a king who cared about his people. And I want to tell you a little story about an example. And this is the story of Zacchaeus. Now, Zacchaeus was a very short man. He wasn't very tall. He wasn't as tall as most people. And he'd not had a very nice life because, you know, if you're different, people are often unkind to you. Now, our school, we hope, is a place that everyone can be happy. If people are a bit different, that's fine. But I'm afraid that people today can be very unkind to people who are different. And it was just the same then. Zacchaeus had had a lot of teasing and a lot of laughing at him during his life because he was so short. And then Zacchaeus got a job working for the Romans. And you'll remember the Romans were the people who'd taken over the Jewish lands and they were in charge. So the Jewish people had to do what they were told. And Zacchaeus, he was a Jew, but he got a job working for the Romans. And he was a tax collector. Now, collecting taxes actually is a very good job because without our taxes in this country pay for our National Health Service and all sorts of other services that we need. We all know about the National Health Service and how much we've needed them with this virus, don't we? And I'm sure you were out there clapping when we used to clap for the NHS to encourage people. Well, Zacchaeus, you see, got his own back on the people who'd been unkind to him. He didn't just collect the taxes he should collect. He collected extra. And the Romans weren't bothered. As long as they got what they wanted, they weren't bothered about Zacchaeus being dishonest and taking more off the people. And so the people grew to really dislike Zacchaeus because he worked for the Romans and they knew that he was taking more money off them than he actually needed to collect. Well, one day, lots of people came because they heard Jesus was coming and they'd heard about his wonderful stories and they'd heard about his healing power and they wanted to see this Jesus. So crowds of people gathered. And Zacchaeus thought, I'd love to see Jesus as well. But of course, when he got there was no way that he was going to be able to see because they wouldn't let him push to the front because he was so short, because they didn't like Zacchaeus. So Zacchaeus had an idea and he climbed up a tree. And there he sat, where he was going to get a really good view of Jesus. And the people laughed at Zacchaeus. Oh, look at short Zacchaeus. He's had to get up a tree. So they weren't very kind at all. And when Jesus came, Zacchaeus thought, well, he won't notice me up here. And do you know, the very first thing Jesus noticed was Zacchaeus. And he talked to the people. And then he said, Zacchaeus, come down from that tree. This afternoon, I want to come to your house for tea. Well, the people were amazed. Huh, what sort of man is this Jesus? He wants to go and have tea with a sinner, with a tax collector. But really, do you know that Jesus, being kind to Zacchaeus, it changed his heart. It changed his heart from being hard and greedy and spiteful. And he said to Jesus, I'm going to give half of everything I've got to the poor. And I'm going to pay back every last penny that I've taken from people that I shouldn't have taken. And do you know, Zacchaeus was a changed man because Jesus had understood him. He understood how Zacchaeus had become the spiteful person he was. And he was changed and he wasn't spiteful anymore. Now, Jesus bothered with people that other people didn't bother with. So I want you to think on Sunday and in your class, think about Jesus being King. And on Sunday, we're thinking about Christ the King Sunday. But he's not the same kind of king. And it caused him some problems in the Bible, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the weeks to come. It caused problems with the people of Bible times. But Jesus was a different kind of king. And we've looked at that and thought about that today, haven't we? But one of the very special things about Jesus was that he cared about all the people, those people that often get pushed to the side. Oh, he's not very important. She's not very important. Jesus thought they were important. Jesus thinks you're important. And so that story of Zacchaeus is just one example of when Jesus chose to be with someone that everybody thought wasn't important. And by being kind and showing that compassion and feeling for Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus was changed and became a good person. Now let's say our school prayer together. This is our school. Let peace dwell here. Let the room be full of contentment. Let love abide here. Love of one another, love of mankind, love of life itself, and love of God. Let us remember that as many hands build a house, so many hearts make a school. Amen. It's been lovely having time with you. I